Welcome to Dig Deep, the mining podcast. In this podcast, we go deep into mining news, hot topics, and live interviews with mining professionals and leading figures in the mining industry. Introducing your host, Rob Tyson, founder and director of Mining International and Mining International Executive, a leading global mining recruitment and headhunting agency.
Hi mining community, welcome back to another episode of the Dig Deep, the mining podcast. And today's guest, who's actually a returning guest, who appeared earlier this year in January, which was episode 497. Juan Carlos, who's the president and CEO of Canstar Resources, who are a TSX venture listed junior miner focused in mineral exploration in Newfoundland, Canada. Juan has over 15 years experience in executive management, capital markets, finance and commercial and strategic development. He stepped into the CEO role early this year. So he's going to give us an update since we last spoke. Their new joint venture agreement, talk about their VMS deposits and why they are attractive propositions. And they recently launched the Geophysics survey update and discussed their unique board and what they bring to the company and a lot more. I just want to give a shout out to our sponsors, Hallcroft, who are leaders in property risk management in the mining industry since 1992. They offer insurance risk surveys, construction risk reviews, and asset criticality assessments and more. They work across 600 sites globally and support all areas of mining and mineral extraction. So if you're looking for any property and insurance risk management services, then please visit their website at www.hallcroft.com. And all the details are in our show notes. Ron, welcome back to the podcast. How are you?
Thanks a lot, Rob. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great. Thank you for coming back on. For those that didn't listen to the previous episode, encourage you to go back and have a listen. So that was just 5-6 months ago, episode 497. So for those that didn't listen to that episode, just wondering if you can just give us a brief overview of yourself and Canstar.
Yeah, absolutely. So Canstar Resources is a TSXV listed junior that's focused on transforming neglected mineral systems into strategic assets for the next super cycle. I joined the company as CEO in January of 2024. So January of 2024 really began for us a foundational year, rebuilding the team, bringing in new board members, new advisors, obviously new investors, and really getting familiar with the company's assets. In Newfoundland, we've got a great exploration portfolio in a tier 1 jurisdiction, 2 VMS projects we'll talk about later today that are subject to a new, really exciting joint venture for us, and then a gold and antimony project as well that's in south central Newfoundland. My background was in offshore banking for about 10 years with UBS out of the Houston office, principally covering Latin America. And since then, I've been focused on emerging opportunities, high growth opportunities in the technology space and in the mining sector, where I've been for the last 6 years or so.
Let's start with obviously some of the big news that you've recently released, and you've announced obviously a major joint venture with VMS Mining Corporation. Just wondering if you can just walk us through the structure of the deal and why it's such a pivotal development for Canstar, and including the non-dilutive to Canstar shareholders, as you've mentioned previously.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I think one of the subjects that we covered in the last podcast is, some of the challenges that junior miners face, and how we were addressing some of those challenges proactively, and actually using some of those challenges to create the opportunities that really constitute call it the strategic foundation for our company and what we want to do. So, some of the challenges we discussed, obviously, challenges with dilution, challenges with access to technical expertise, something that you help your clients with a lot. So for us, when we came into Canstar, we really, really liked the people. We really liked the jurisdiction, and we really liked the projects, but we knew that in order for us to get the most benefit out of these projects and really to be able to evaluate the projects effectively, we needed more intellectual capital. We needed that top tier technical expertise. I think that's so critical in this space, as many of your listeners know, particularly when you're talking about expertise that is specific to a particular mineral style. And so this joint venture that we announced, it actually began in September of 2024, sort of the foundation for that joint venture. I had the opportunity to travel out to Newfoundland to meet Dr. Harold Gibson, a very interesting gentleman, extremely intelligent. And so for those of your readers who aren't familiar, Dr. Gibson, his background, he spent about 12 years as an exploration geologist in industry and then spent about 40 years at Laurentian University. He's a professor emeritus there of ore deposits and volcanology. And he's also been at the forefront of mining innovation in Canada. He was the founding executive director of the Metal Earth Initiative, which was a sort of unprecedented public-private partnership, over $100 million invested in, advances in data science, exploration science. So he was the founding executive director of that initiative. And from our standpoint, he brought everything to the table that we could hope for in a partner for our VMS assets. And I should just say, you know, there's probably a few people in the world tops that have Harold's level of expertise, particularly with volcanogenic massive sulfide deposits or VMS deposits. I can touch more on that deposit style in a little bit if you'd like, but at a high level, what makes them interesting is these are the only deposits that you can actually see being created in the modern era. They're created through these hydrothermal processes and begin on the seafloor essentially. And Harold, not only has he been to hundreds of these deposits around the world and seen millions of meters of core, he's also sent ROVs down to the seafloor to see these things being created in situ. They're also interesting in that they're formed with the host rock. And so that makes them sort of an interesting and I think intellectually interesting deposit type. So we, in September of 2024, had the opportunity to host Dr. Harold Gibson at our Mary March VMS project in Newfoundland. He came up because a group called VMS Mining Corporation, which is a private group, it's a company that was founded by four individuals that are behind some of the biggest success stories over the last 10 years, including Cisco Mining. These are individuals that we go into greater detail on their biographies and on the companies they've been involved with, and a news release that we released just about 30 days ago. And so this group set up VMS Mining Corporation specifically to target VMS deposits globally, and they brought in Harold Gibson after he retired from Laurentian University to be sort of their lead technical individual. We met in Newfoundland. He was looking to expand their VMS portfolio. They currently have a project in Peru. We really hit it off. He was really excited by what he saw in the drill core at Mary March. Over 10 meters of massive sulfide, about 17% base metal content by volume, and 4 grams per ton gold. And so that began sort of a rigorous multi-month due diligence process for Harold and VMS. And earlier this year, we were able to begin negotiations on a strategic joint venture agreement. Very simply, the joint venture agreement is 4 stages total. The first stage is $1.5 million. VMS will be investing into the Buchans and Mary March VMS assets in Newfoundland. That'll give them 10% of the projects. So that implies a pre-money valuation of about $15 million for just those projects alone. That's great for us. That's about double our market cap. And phase two, there'll be a $4 million investment that'll take them to 40% ownership. And phase three, there will be a $6 million investment that'll take them to 60% ownership. So in total, it's $11.5 million for 60% ownership. Canstar then gets pro rata investment rights in phase four. That means that we get to maintain that 40% position after the project's been de-risked. So super exciting project for us, and the fact that VMS is coming in at the asset level means that our corporate shareholders aren't diluted as a result of the strategic investment. So again, just to kind of sum up, we think this deal really hit everything that we wanted to see. It brought in top tier technical expertise. It's non-dilutive and it's serious capital in the ground on an accelerated basis, really looking for a tier one discovery. And we think there's one potentially to be found there in that district.
Who is VMS Corporation, and why is their involvement such a strong endorsement for obviously your project? And what should listeners know about their leadership team and obviously track record within the industry?
Yeah, so VMS Mining Corporation is a public company. It's a company that's really leads with technical expertise first, and they're focused on building a high quality, VMS, volcanogenic massive sulfide polymetallic portfolio. As I mentioned, they have a project in Peru. They're looking at other projects worldwide, but after a pretty extensive search to expand out of Peru, they found Newfoundland, and our projects in particular as sort of their home projects. VMS Mining Corporation is the fact that they're a private corporation means that some of your listeners probably won't have heard of them, but this is a group that has uh, successes totaling about 4.1 billion in acquisition value over the last 8 years. So, Osisko Mining, Aurelian Resources, Dalradian Resources, O3 Mining, some of the big wins over the last few years. These members, the members of the VMS Mining Corporation, are sort of, include founding executives, founding board members of these other companies as well. So really a sterling track record. I would say it places them at the top of the industry in terms of what they've been able to identify and deliver to their shareholders in the past.
You've mentioned Dr. Harold Gibson, a globally obviously recognised authority on VMS systems. He's obviously now leading technical strategy for the joint venture. What does this involvement signal to the market, and how does his expertise, I suppose, shape your exploration strategy?
It's great. Yeah. I think, first of all, what he brings to the team, and this is a little bit of an intangible, is energy. That energy, the excitement that he has, which has formed, over many, many years of being passionate about these kinds of projects, of being passionate about discoveries. So that's huge for us to have that kind of energy. Second of all, that technical leadership, as you said, this is someone who has over 100 peer-reviewed papers published in the subject matter. He has an absolute subject matter expertise. And from our standpoint, and this is something I think we may have discussed this a little bit in Toronto earlier this year, but I think when you see the best explorationists, and I think explorationists are different from geologists, the best explorationists seem to, first of all, they're oriented towards making a discovery and doing something that's, translates into economic success. And I think that's very important, not simply satisfying intellectual curiosity, but they also seem to have this uncanny ability to, assemble a sort of a working model of the projects in their mind. And so, sort of every little piece of the puzzle is sort of adding to that working model. And I think that's, it's something very exciting about working with Harold when you see the way that he sort of processes the project information, when you see the way that he actually, responds to, the drill core, for example. And so I think, that sort of ability to have that global holistic model constantly being constructed in his mind, I think, allows him to be able to give us a big picture perspective on what we need to do to solve the key challenges associated with the project that ultimately can lead to a discovery.
Let's take a slight step back for listeners that are, I suppose, unfamiliar with volcanogenic massive sulfide mess deposits. What are they, and why are they so obviously important? What makes them attractive targets for exploration-focused juniors like Canstar?
hmm Well, VMS deposits are very interesting in part because they're polymetallic. So these deposits commonly are associated with several different metals, oftentimes up to five. What's very interesting about the VMS projects that we have in Newfoundland is that they're located in the Buchans district. And the Buchans district was home to an Asarco mining complex that lasted about 60 years from the 1920s to the 1980s. For about 50 years of operations, the Buchans mines were considered to be the highest grade VMS mines in the world. These were mines that delivered ore that was about 20% base metal, over 20% base metal content by volume. Over those 70 years, 60 years of production, the mining complex also produced almost 700,000 ounces of gold. So, you're talking about a mining system that gives you, let's say economic flexibility and exposure to, not only critical metals, but also precious metals. And when you're developing economic models for these deposits, you can actually emphasize one metal versus another, which gives you a tremendous amount of flexibility. So, in this case, at the Buchans project, we have at the Buchans in the Buchans district, I should say, we have gold and silver, as well as copper, lead, and zinc. The zinc contents are very high. In fact, there's a section of the Mary March discovery hole, which I mentioned, has 10 meters of massive sulfide, about 17% base metal content by volume. There's sections of that drill core that are 40% metal content by volume. So So super exciting projects. And I think when you look at the Buchans project as well as the Mary March project, you know that you're in a jurisdiction where, because you have social license, it's consistently a top 10 Fraser Institute ranked mining jurisdiction. You know that if you find something, you can mine it, which is absolutely critical. You know that you're in a district where tier one deposits have been discovered in the past. And you know that you're in an area where the geological processes that create these mineral systems, are confirmed to exist. I mentioned the discovery hole, but also obviously the mining complex there. And you're in a mining district where the grades are outstanding. So I think, everything comes together. It makes this not only, a special deposit type because they are polymetallic, and, very well known metallurgy, very well known, very sort of understood deposit system, but also, I think this district in particular is very special for VMS deposits.
From a macroeconomic perspective, why are VMS deposits especially relevant right now, given obviously global demand for critical and precious metals?
That's a great question. Look, I mean, I think we talked about, with a little bit more focus in the last podcast about sort of the geopolitical situation and its relevance to the mining sector. I think that we've seen over the course of the last few months here that these, geopolitical drivers are, if anything, only accelerating. I think we've seen that inflation is going to be a little bit stubborn and a little bit sticky. I think, in the West, particularly in the United States, you're still seeing a tendency to deficit spend. I think you're seeing, de-dollarization continue to be a very important driver of markets. Increasing purchases of gold by central banks. And obviously, global volatility is not going anywhere. If anything, it's just taking different forms. So, I think we're in this environment where, because of the questions around sort of fiscal policy and fiscal uncertainty, and geopolitical volatility, gold is going to continue to do very, very well. Obviously, we're seeing incredible gold prices, and I fully expect that's going to translate down into the junior sector as we see that the companies with the highest leverage to the commodity prices begin to become increasingly cash flow positive. You're already starting to see some consolidation and some other signs of that. And then separately, and this is again, I think one of the interesting things about the MS deposits, because they're polymetallic, we do have exposure to those critical metals that are going to be important for the energy transition, like copper. But also metals that we think are going to become increasingly relevant as the other major economic drivers continue to accelerate, namely computation and AI and robotics, as well as the reinvigoration and rebuilding of the defense industrial base. I think when I was on the podcast last time, we were talking about how the first time NATO a couple of years ago passed over $1 trillion in cumulative defense spending. Last year was 1.4 trillion, up from 900 billion a few years ago. You're now seeing, and for the first time, the majority of NATO countries hit 2% in defense funding. You're now seeing countries openly talk about resetting that goal to 5%. The other big number there is that over 30% of NATO spending was actually in hard capex. So these are the kinds of things that I think really can move the needle for the mining sector. And when you add them all together, we think we continue to believe that we're seeing the perfect ingredients for the next commodity super cycle.
The Buchanans and Mary March projects sit within one of the obviously richest historical mining districts in the world. What makes these assets so geologically special, and why were they missed or obviously unexplored until now?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah. So, there's two VMS projects that we have in Newfoundland. Both of them are subject to this joint venture. They're both located broadly in the Buchans district, but they both do have some unique characteristics. So, the Buchans project is right, as the name suggests, in the heart of the Buchans district. It's surrounded and immediately adjacent to our Buchans project are all of the five deposits that were mined by ASARCO for 60 years from the 1920s to the 1980s. So you have basically, a nice sized project right in the middle of a district where some of the highest grade EMS deposits of all time were mined. Our work when we came into the company was really to understand these projects and the potential for hosting another tier one deposit. And so we set about, undertaking new geological modeling, and reviewing all the existing data on those projects. And one of the things that really stood out to us is that, this is based on the geological modeling and some of the analysis that we've been able to undertake internally, is that the Buchans River Formation, which is the host geological unit that hosted all 5 of the Asarco deposits, we believe that it continues at depth underneath the entirety of our Buchans project. What's also very compelling about our Buchans project is that in 2017, there was an airborne SkyTem survey that identified a multi-kilometer conductor anomaly that goes right through the center of the project. So very, very tantalizing. It's the same kind of anomalism that you see light up very nicely around those 5 deposits that were previously mined by Asarco. In terms of, why this area, we consider it to be underexplored, even though it's in the heart of one of the most, obviously, storied mining districts in Newfoundland. The old timers didn't have the benefit of modern geophysics. And so, when they found these very high grade deposits, they found them at the surface or near the surface. They chased the veins down underground. And it's very striking when you look at the cross section and the geological modeling there for the Buchans project. You see that multi-kilometer conductor anomaly, and you see drill traces just either miss it or not penetrate to the depths of that conductor anomaly. Because again, the old timers were sort of just drilling, looking for something, drilling blind, if you will. There was one drill hole from the 1970s that seemed to intersect the anomaly. It's kind of an interesting. It's interesting when you go back and you sort of review these old mine logs and you look to mine information, if you will, from these logs. The quality can always vary, but here, what's interesting is the log notes that there was over 100 meters of massive alteration that was found, intense alteration that was found in this one drill hole that did penetrate that conductor anomaly zone. So we think this area is very underexplored, and in fact, speaking of modern geophysics, that is, that we do have a big geophysics program currently underway at Buchans, to give us an additional set of data that could generate some drill targets for us. The Mary March project is different. It's a few kilometers to the west of the Buchans project. This is a very interesting project in that the highest grades ever found in the Buchans district outside of the Buchans mining camp itself have been found at that Mary March project. I mentioned the Mary March discovery hole. There's also been high grade debris flows found in trenching. And quite simply, these projects, just simply haven't been the focus for the companies that have owned them in the past, including Canstar. Canstar really actually came to be known as a gold exploration company. And in fact, we do still have, I think, a very compelling district scale gold and antimony project in Newfoundland. So these projects sort of sat fallow for a bit, and as we've discussed before, it's sort of one of the nature, sort of the, one of the facts that you see consistently in the junior space is the companies have to allocate and prioritize their time and resources. So again, why we think that bringing in expertise, bringing in that intellectual capital, bringing in the ability to put capital to work in that district is super important for us. So yeah, that gives you a little bit of an overview of those projects. I think the exploration opportunity at Mary March is different than Buchans. It's shallower. That drill intercept that I mentioned took place, hit probably at around 250 feet. So it's shallower than Buchans, and there, because we have that massive sulfide discovery hole. Again, we know that the mineralization, the potential for high grade VMS, Buchans grade VMS mineralization is there. The question there, and actually this is really striking when you look at the drill core at Mary March, you can see that VMS fragment is faulted off. So the question for us then, from an exploration standpoint, is how do you understand the structural setting there? How do you sort of reverse engineer the structures? If it turns out that Mary March is stratigraphically the same as Buchans, which I think is totally possible. If not, it could be another sort of stratigraphy that's equally as prospective. But you have a sort of the same scale alteration zone. You have obviously a lot of similarities, a lot of proximity. So if the stratigraphy is the same in Buchans, I think that obviously will aid our ability to sort of reverse engineer the structures. But ultimately, that's what it comes down to. It's sort of reverse engineering the structures and understanding the displacement vectors involved there. So I think both of these projects, in some ways, it's nice that they're both a little bit different. They have different risk reward profiles, different sort of drivers of success. But I think both, super exciting. And, obviously, I think the the biggest testament to that right now is the fact that a group like VMS and Harold Gibson are excited to get involved.
You recently launched a deep censoring DAS Vision 3D IP geophysics survey in the Buchans district. What's new or different about this approach, and how can it help unlock the next major discovery?
Yeah, absolutely. So we began, I should say, in January, a joint geophysics program with a company called Cantera. Cantera are our neighbors in the Buchans district. They own a fair bit of land in the Buchans district. Most notably, they own all the areas that were previously mined by Asarco. So we're sort of right in the core of their property holdings there at our Buchans project, and then our Mary March project is separate. Um, the guys at Cantera are great. They've had some good success in the district. They announced in the fall of 2024 about 60 meters of 3% copper equivalent drilling adjacent to our claims there in Buchans. And I think the market reacted quite favorably to those results, which was good to see, especially in a market that, as we know, has been relatively challenged and has shown some great signs, but has yet to sort of accelerate into the next cycle. Um, the the collaboration with Cantera is a really interesting and striking component of this geophysical program. So this is a joint program with Cantera. It is a ground-based deep IP geophysics program that is using Abitibi geophysics. And what's great about this program is not only are we sharing the mobilization and demobilization costs with Cantera, but we are also sharing all project data with one another. So this is going to give us a tremendous snapshot of the geology. And I think when that's one of the things that I think really stands out about the Buchans district is there's so much data to work with. In fact, sort of a big component of the next round of exploration for us, which is already underway at Mary March and Buchans, really does involve that sort of data mining approach. So you combine all this publicly available data with the proprietary data that we have, the proprietary data that Cantera has, and you sort of add to it this, truly district scale survey data. You have the ability to have this new survey data basically intersect with the previously collected geophysical data there, because it is going to be at Buchans, it is going to be a geophysical story there. So from our standpoint, I mentioned that 2017 SkyTem survey that has those conductor anomalies identified across the property, including the large one in the center of the property. You combine that with this new ground-based survey, and I think it's going to, give you the opportunity to have some really interesting scout drilling opportunities, at which point you could look at doing borehole geophysics and getting a really compelling picture of the underground situation there.
Why do geophysical techniques like deep IP and electromagnetic surveys critical to modern exploration success, especially in systems like Buchanan's and prior to operators having lacked today's technology edge?
That's a great question. I mean, I think the answer in some ways is quite simple, which is that, the next phase of exploration for the world and discovery for the world, particularly in districts where there's been a lot of work before. I mean, it's often said that the best place to look for a new deposit is, in the shadow of the head frame, so to speak. But yeah, I think the next round of discovery is going to be it's going to be increasingly at depth and undercover. And so, you have to have, most of the places in the world where you have, sort of high grade showings on the surface that lead to, big time discoveries and big time deposits. I think those are, for the most part, picked over. And so I think increasingly you're going to see, and in fact, this bears out in the data if you just look at sort of, the key drivers of new discoveries over time. There's a great chart that I saw a year or so ago that shows, every single year since the late 1800s, all of the top deposits that were discovered annually by the method that drove the discovery, and it's it used to be sort of prospecting and serendipity. Increasingly over time it's geophysics, and that's because you need these indirect methodologies in order to find things undercover and at depth.
The Mary March project has shown exceptional high-grade mineralization. Can you speak to the significance of this discovery hole and how you plan to vector in on the rest of the mineralized system?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, like I said, I think you have in the Mary March project, you have a project where the highest grades outside of the core Buchans district, in the Buchans district overall, outside of the Buchans camp, pardon, have been discovered. You have, and let me maybe take a little bit of a step back, right? And because I think this sort of touches on, our exploration philosophy, right? I think exploration, as we all know, it's a challenging game. You have to have a lot of things go right for you. And so, oftentimes you're looking for, a sort of a set of characteristics that really have to align to make an exploration investment attractive. First of all, you have to have the right jurisdiction. Again, Newfoundland, top 10 jurisdiction in the Fraser Institute. I think it's really important to emphasize. I was talking to some individuals the other day, fellow executive that has a project in South America. They just drilled 6,000 meters, and it's going to take them, 6 to 9 months to get the next drill permit. Newfoundland, it's maybe 6 to 8 weeks. You have amazing access to infrastructure. So we are, our projects are located in a district that has been mined. In fact, Buchans, which is the town there next to the old mining systems, this is the town that was founded as a result of mining. So mining for that area, represents economic opportunity. So you have, a jurisdiction where you can mine, you do have social license to explore. You have a highly skilled and trained workforce. The Valentine Lake gold mine, which is expected to be commissioned and pour first gold in the third quarter of 2025. So there's excitement on the island, and you do have a skilled workforce that understands the mining sector and can really contribute. So you have access to infrastructure as well. You have, you know, all of the conditions are there to make a tier one discovery. You're in a district where, you know, those kinds of discoveries have been made in the past. And, as I mentioned before, you have, this fact that, the structural complexity of that area meant that it was difficult for exploration to take place there without modern geophysics, without sort of some of the modern technologies that we have in terms of data modeling and so on. So yeah, so I think all the conditions are there to make an exciting discovery, and look, I think that the discovery hole there again, it proves that that the processes needed to generate these very high grade, very special deposits that are characteristic of the Buchans district are there in that area. It's just up to us to find them, and I think bringing in VMS, obviously, kind of being the cornerstone of the foundation to make a discovery there, we feel like we're in the best position possible to make that discovery.
Golden Baie has some intriguing antimony potential, which isn't often discussed. Why is antimony a strategy or strategic focus for you? And what's the exploration path forward at that project?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, antimony is very interesting. It's a metal that many outside of the sector haven't heard of, but it is a mineral that is absolutely critical for military and high technology applications. So you have to have antimony for body armor, armor-piercing ammunition, high-end displays, night vision, those kinds of things. And it's a mineral that if you don't have it, you're in a real bind, and that's why you've seen such an intense focus on developing new sources of antimony in the West. I think probably the best example of that is the stibnite mine, Perpetua Resources in Idaho, that has received not only tens of millions of dollars to advance the project into and through development, but also over $1 billion in Export Import Bank of the United States support for developing the project and getting it into production. So the antimony potential of Golden Bay is something that we identified very soon, getting involved with the company. Prior to our getting involved, and this is just really a sort of, I think, demonstrates to you the changing global dynamics we discussed before, how these changing global dynamics are driving new investment and exploration. Antimony at the project was prevalent, but it was really viewed as more of a pathfinder, as a sort of a way to vector in on the gold. And when we got involved, we saw, some of the antimony showings, in particular, in sort of the northeast portion of Golden Bay. There's a prospect area called Le Pouvoir, and there we found, over 70% antimony in a surface vein along with high grade gold. You had some historical drilling there. We think it took place down dip. So, suboptimal kind of, few holes that were poked there a number of years back that hit a really interesting, over 30% antimony over a meter. So, there was all these kind of sniffs that were really interesting. But again, antimony hadn't been looked for and hadn't really been looked for sort of as a principal driver of value for the project. We did, I think it's worth mentioning when it comes to antimony that to me, it almost perfectly encapsulates this kind of what we expect to continue to see as a result of the current geopolitical environment. So when we got involved, I think antimony was maybe $14,000 a ton. We saw that double and actually pass $30,000 a ton when China curbed antimony exports to the United States in August of 2024. So I do think we're going to be in this environment where pricing dislocations are going to cause, I think a lot of potential for juniors that are involved in this space. Another very interesting thing, with respect to Golden Bay and the Le Pouvoir prospect area is that it sits about 90 kilometers from the Beaver Brook antimony mine, which for a time was the only source of antimony production in North America. And so, there's a geological setting, it's orogenic gold, high grade antimony, and it's this exact same structural setting as Beaver Brook. So we do think there's tremendous antimony potential there, along with high grade gold potential there. And that's certainly been a focus for us. So we've undertaken new geological modeling in those antimony areas. And I think from our perspective, we would love to have a partner with sort of the same intellectual capital, the same sort of economic capability of a VMS come in and help us develop that project. But either way, we're continuing to advance that project, and I think there's certainly some exciting opportunities there.
You've built a team and advisory board that includes national security experts, capital markets, and technical leaders. How does that unique mix inform your corporate strategy, obviously in today's geopolitical environment?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Well, look, in terms of geopolitics, it's sort of been at the core of, that geopolitical awareness has been at the core of everything that we've done. My CFO and executive vice president, Will Upshur, did his master's at Johns Hopkins. He, began his career in national security doing counterinsurgency strategy in Afghanistan before joining Booz Allen Hamilton as a management consultant. So, kind of a heavy defense and national security background there. Obviously, we brought on David Kilcullen. We mentioned him a little bit in the last podcast. Truly a world-class expert on geopolitics. Every time I catch up with him, he's sort of, coming out of a skiff somewhere or coming out of, sensitive meetings with global leaders. But, someone who has spent his entire career focused on the nexus between critical technologies and national security and is now, in collaboration with us, sort of working on understanding the nexus between critical technologies and critical materials and critical minerals. So that geopolitical awareness is sort of at the core of what we do. I think, as our projects continue to advance, having those connections to the U.S. public sector, I think, is going to position us for support in an environment where, we talked a bit about this last time, but I on 2X, I should mention, I watched, every single confirmation hearing for the Trump cabinet, and every single one of them talked critical minerals. And so, we think that's a very, very important part of our strategy. And then another important part of our strategy, which, I mentioned my background, is not one that began in the mining sector. It's one that began in financial services and strategic development. And, I think our vision has always been to marry the best of the mining sector with the best of outside of the mining sector, because I think in order to be successful in this environment, in order to capitalize on the best opportunities out there, I think you have to have that, those diverse perspectives. And when I talk about diversity here, I don't just mean, some of the characteristics of diversity that we're familiar with, although we have that as well, but it's that intellectual diversity. It's the diversity that comes from, having really, high level experience in multiple sectors. And so when you look at our board, we just added Nyla Beth Gabel to the board. We're super excited for her to join the board formally. She previously was involved in with the company as a board observer and joined the board officially this year. But her background sort of gives you a great example of how we're able to think and approach our strategy differently because of our backgrounds and because of the mix of experience that we have. She previously was a senior executive at Booz Allen Hamilton, major, obviously, Fortune 500 management consulting firm. It's kind of the lead management consulting firm for the U.S. public sector. She was a senior executive at SAIC, major U.S. Technology corporation, and was also a senior executive at Verizon, obviously major telecommunications giant there. So, when you have someone like that that brings just not only a very refined perspective from her work with these, massive Fortune 100 and Fortune 500 companies, it really, I think, it allows us to think and execute differently ultimately. And I think you see that, I think a great example of that is the way that we structured this deal with VMS. It's, when you look at the structure of the deal, it's not like your typical earn an agreement. It's different. It's phase based. The phases are based on project success. It's real money in the ground quickly. It's avoiding dilution to the extent that we can for our corporate shareholders. So I think that just comes from having being informed by a different set of precedent, if you will, by having those perspectives from different industries. So something that we're super excited about, and I think something that really runs to the core of our identity as a company.
And lastly, what's the sort of short to medium term outlook for Canstar, maybe over the rest of this year going into next year?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. So, exploration is already underway at our VMS projects in Newfoundland. We mentioned the deep IP survey undergoing at Buchans. We should That survey should be wrapped up, and we should be receiving the results from that survey over the next couple of months here. That's going to be really important for us to interpret those results, identify some new targets and some new opportunities. We are working with a great group out of Canada called Hard Rock Geophysics, a couple of former Glencore geophysicists to help us do the interpretation and modeling there. So super excited for that. I think that's going to be a very important stage of development, or a very important milestone, if you will, sorry, for the Buchans project. For the Mary March project, we've been, sort of heavily involved since announcing the LOI last month, and putting together and refining the budget and the exploration planning for Mary March. We know at a high level what it's going to involve. These are all kinds of things that we worked with VMS to develop prior to announcing the LOI. It's going to be trenching, mapping, geophysics, data compilation. So we're now working on, planning when we're going to actually get out in the field and begin advancing that project. Obviously, the data compilation stuff is happening in advance of that. I should say, it's important. We did recently announce that we received the first $500,000 from VMS Mining. So we're continuing to work on advancing the definitive agreements for that joint venture. And we expect that there'll be some news on those shortly. But I think it's just worth pointing out, the materiality and significance of that LOI that we signed with VMS, that they have already given us $500,000 to advance these projects, and it's something that, I think, was one of the reasons that we wanted to go into partnership with this group, is that they're serious about making a discovery and they know that time is everything. And so I think, in terms of milestones, we've obviously got some updates at Buchans in the near term. We're rolling out the exploration program at Mary March. So, as soon as we have the next round of targets there, I think that'll be really exciting for the market. And then obviously we'll continue to advance our gold and antimony project, and, maybe be announcing something there. I should say also that people should keep an eye out for some exciting opportunities in AI and data science that we have working on in the background as well. I hinted at that, I think, in our last podcast, and I think there's some really interesting things there that could be coming down the pipeline soon. So a number of things to keep excited for us. I'll just summarize by saying, I think for us, 2024 was a foundational year. 2025 for us is all about speed of execution.
Juan, really appreciate you taking the time to give us an update on Canstar. Obviously talk about the projects and talk about the new joint venture. So wish you well for the remainder of the year. If our audience wants to follow the story and receive obviously updates in your progress, how can they go about doing that, and what social media platform channels are you on?
Yeah, absolutely. We do have a LinkedIn page, Canstar Resources. Of course, I'm also on LinkedIn. We have a website that we're actually making some changes to, but investors and others who are interested in our story can certainly access our website to find our most up-to-date, corporate presentation. And, we're on Twitter X, Canstar_rocks, our ticker ROX. And we try to keep a pretty good presence on social media. And being small, we certainly pride ourselves on being able to respond to incoming requests for information. So happy to engage with anyone and continue the conversation offline for those who might be interested.
Yeah, great. Again, thank you for your time. Hopefully our audience will reach out to you and obviously sign up for newsletters as well. And obviously follow the news flow that that Canstar put out there. So all the best for the remainder of this year.
Thanks a lot, Rob. Great seeing you.
Yeah, and yourself. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed the episode. As always, appreciate your continued support. Please keep sharing these episodes far and wide. And until next time, happy mining.
Thank you for listening. Remember to reach out to Rob via the show notes and be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Until next time, happy mining, helping each other to improve the mining industry.